Good morning, church. Thank you for this wonderful music. As far as I'm concerned, we can have a few more and go home. But here we are. This is a church. I've been living in this country for 25 years, and I'm a proud British passport holder. And in those years, I have learned some cherished institutions that I learned also to love here as well. One of them is National Health Service, a wonderful project. Even if it fails, as they say it will, it was one of the most beautiful moments in human history, I would say. Then here we have also a BBC, the best television in the world. Then we have this institution called a garden shed. We have apparently 11.5 million sheds, and we spend over 60 million hours a week in them. Garden shed is a place where many books and poems were written, many Nobel Prize won, and where the wind-up radio was invented. George Bernard Shaw was writing in his shed, Thomas Dylan, Virginia Woolf, even Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon was conceived in a garden shed. Then there is this institution called tradition, DIY, when thousands of over-optimistic men who in their desire to prove their manhood and make their wives proud immerse in a way overreaching projects that end up in over 99,000 of emergency hospital admissions a year. Well, one Sunday, not long ago, I decided that I should do some DIY. I needed an adjustable spanner. I looked into the shed and I could not find it. Now, this was not a surprise to me. This makes a perfect sense, because I'm one of those people that don't keep everything in a toolbox. I leave them strategically placed around the property. The radiator key for the bleeding in the radiator is where? At the radiator, isn't it? I wish my wife is here to hear that, that you agree with me. And then, since my wife likes to rearrange the pictures on the wall all the time, my hammer is leaning somewhere on the wall down there. My screwdriver, tester, and pliers are more likely to be found in a fuse box cabinet. The rakes on the fence and so on. Well, as I said, I was neither surprised nor annoyed that I could not find my spanner. But I was determined not to give up this time, and I declared to myself that I would not stop until I find my adjustable spanner. So I searched for the whole Sunday, and I could not find it. That night I went to bed perplexed, but still determined to find it. Around 2 a.m. I woke up with my eyes wide open. Airing cabinet, I exclaimed in my head. So I emptied all the towels at 2 o'clock in the morning, and my spanner was not there. Monday, on and off, search continued without any results. Tuesday, I made the careless and potentially grave mistake. You see, I asked my wife if she had misplaced my adjustable spanner. She glanced me with this only the married man knows look, which said, "Don't you ever ask me that question again." Wednesday, nothing. And then on Thursday morning, something strange happened. While I was searching for my spanner, I realized something. I forgot why I was looking the spanner for in the first place. And for the rest of the week, I tried to remember what I was searching for and why I was doing all this. Sometimes the life of the churchgoer can resemble this illustration. For months, years, we attend the church, we listen to sermons, we glean through the finer points of our theology. Every Sabbath we go to church, we pray, and sometimes on our journey of life, we may stop and wonder, what are we doing here? Where am I going? Shouldn't I be doing something else? When I was still an intern, I remember the statement given to me by a senior colleague. He said, "Pastor thinks of looking for another job at least twice a year." This statement still profoundly resonates in my mind. I don't know about you in your profession, but surely sometimes you think, I should be doing something else. Last time I had this moment was in April last year, about the Easter time. After an evangelistic campaign, I listened to a series of sermons that continued the bountiful references to conspiracy theories, to Illuminatis, Masons and Jesuits and Pope Francis and the New World Order. As I was driving home the very last night, I thought myself, do I really want to be part of all this? Is this what good news is all about? I realized that I had a crisis. Unfortunately, God works indeed in a mysterious ways, because it just happened that the very next morning after that very profound experience, disappointment, I went on holiday with my family. I cannot explain or emphasize to you enough how important that detail was. I dread to think what would have happened if this was just another working day. And when we go on holidays, we like to think about our lives, isn't it? We like to kind of see where we are, what we are doing. But also one other thing that I like to do is I like to, because I'm relaxed, to watch the world passing by. I just like to sit and watch people as they pass by. One early morning, I went to a marketplace in my wife's country of Macedonia, a bustling market where the east literally meets west. A very interesting place. I sat on the low wall and I enjoyed the observing traders setting up their stalls, shoppers haggling over the price of vegetables. And as I was watching the crowd, as they passed by, my eyes caught a sight of a little boy just 15 feet away from me and his mother. And I observed them as they were setting up their stool. It was a beautiful sight. 6 or 7-year-old boy and his mom. They were setting up the little square table, selling the colorings for the Easter eggs. And the boy was dressed in worn-out clothes, but he was clean and tidy. You could not help yourself but not notice his pride and an excitement. This was his day, and he savored every moment of it. He savored it because today he will be a trader for real. I could not hear their conversation, but his mom seemed to ask him to be on his own for a little while she gets another box. Or you should have seen him. He buttoned up his shirt at the neck, arranged his hair, and had to put up the broad smile, relishing to be in charge and waiting there for the first customer to arrive. I delighted in observing his pure innocence, his optimism, this beautiful boy with such a positive take on life. However, in a moment, just as I was watching him, out of the blue, a much darker thought descended on my mind, like the sudden cold wind in a dark night. You see, he was a gypsy. You may think you know something about the gypsies of Eastern Europe and their plight, but some of you cannot even imagine the scale of discrimination these people are going through right now in the 21st century Europe. These people are often brutalized, ostracized, ghettoized, discriminated by majority population. These are the people who live in abject poverty. And just a few months ago, a young Roma youth were lynched in Hungary and in France, and nobody was even persecuted for that. The prejudice against Roma people run so deep that even a good average Adventist there will start sentence with, yes, it's true they're persecuted, and they would go this, but. They would talk about how they brought this upon themselves, being thieves, cheats, even baby snatchers. I looked at this beautiful boy and thought, or you don't even know the world that you are growing into. This innocence, this pride, beauty, this unrestrained hope will one day be crushed like a flower by a bully, by a hate monger, right-wing nationalist, a concerned citizen, skinhead. I felt so sad for that little boy. As I was driving back to Croatia from Macedonia in the night, I couldn't keep thinking about this boy. I wished I did something for him. Then I knew what I should have done, but it was too late. I just was not quick enough. If I could have turned the clock back, I would have taken 20 pounds out of my pocket. I would come to him. I would buy all the egg paints that he had there. I would stroke his little head and say to him how wonderful and beautiful boy he is. And what inspiration he is. And as I continued driving through the night, I asked myself, where was that urge in me coming from? What this gesture would it make any difference at all to this boy? And the answer to these questions we find in something similar that happened in the Bible. And I found this in one particular story in the Bible, which we usually don't go into. It's an unusual place. In the place in the Bible where usually we read other themes. Place where Adventists and evangelicals are more likely to come to grind their axes with evolutionists rather than to look for an affectionate love story. Genesis 1:26-31 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all creatures that move along the ground.' And God saw all that he made, and it was very good." This story of creation is a familiar one to us. But within this story, there is a deeper, even more beautiful story to behold. Proverbs 25:11 says, "A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in a settings of silver." In the Talmud, ancient rabbis use this verse to refer to deeper meaning of the text presented. On the surface, they would say the biblical text is like a silver dish, beautiful and true. But if you look deeper into the text, you start seeing golden apples in it. And this is a very important lesson for us to learn today, because if we are not careful, we can repeat the same mistake and get into the blind alley, just as our pioneers in the past did 140 years ago. You see, in the middle of the 19th century, we discovered the Sabbath and 10 Commandments. We were so excited about discovering this truth. We were so focused, dedicated, and absorbed that we forgot underlying beauty of these doctrines, which is faith and the grace of Christ. So much so that we had to relearn the doctrine of righteousness by faith. Even today, after so many years, we suffer from that fallout. As you observe how our members struggle with the issue of perfection, grace, and mercy. And likewise today, we too, in Genesis, when we embrace Genesis 1 with equal, single-minded, often narrow passion, just as the Sabbath was embraced by those before us. We seem to see Genesis 1 only as a creation account that has to be fiercely guarded against those who want to erode our truths, be it an evolutionist or some liberal Christians. But in doing so, we are in danger to repeat the same mistake that pioneers did. We are in danger to miss the golden apples in a setting of silver. Yes, Genesis certainly says something about creation of the world, but it also contains much, much more. To begin with, Genesis 1 is actually a piece of poetry. People are spooked about it. They would rather see it to be as in a scientific paper. But you should remember that unlike today, poetry in those days did not only have an aesthetic value, but also the functional one. You know that. You know, the astronomy didn't come because somebody was so obsessed with the stars. It was the people who did agriculture. It was a very functional thing to do. Writing was not there to write poetry. Writing was there to record how many sheep I have. So also people in the pre-writing societies, they would use rhymes so that they could transmit the message faithfully. And you know how it works. You have done your hard study at your university, but you hardly remember any paragraph by heart. But you all remember the rhymes as a child, and you will never forget them. Still, Genesis 1 is also an aesthetic piece of poetry, written to inspire, to enthuse, to encourage, and to bring comfort. Writer in Genesis, Moses, was writing it to people similar to the people whom this little boy in a Macedonian marketplace belonged to. Just as today, gypsies or refugees that are stranded at the northern Greece, they were regarded as nuisance, an unwanted brood, a runt of humanity. Egyptians thought of them to be good for nothing except for punishing work. To them, they were pests who bred uncontrollably, and they had to be controlled. It is always good to remember when Genesis was written down. It was written at the moment when these worthless former slaves were rejected and abandoned to wander in the wilderness. Genesis was first written to them, and only then to the rest of us. And you can see this in the Bible in the way how the Genesis was written. I don't know, did you notice the difference between the biblical stories and the myths that were circulating around in the surrounding cultures? Although there are some occasional similarities between Genesis story and creation stories in Greece, Assyria, and everywhere else, there is something unique, something very unusual about the creation account. If you look at some of these stories, at best, the creation of the mankind was some sort of accident. Like a third child, you know how it goes. You plan for two, then you get relaxed, and then it happens. That's the best how in those especially in the Egyptian myth. And in the other myths, it's an utter catastrophe, the creation of the man. It comes of the bloodshed. I think in a Babylonian myth, the god Marduk slays his brother, and out of the blood he creates the mankind only to serve them and so on. Terrible stories. Nobody really wanted the mankind to happen. You remember the Prometheus who was keen to help the mankind. He was feeling so sorry for them, and he had to endure the everlasting punishment. However, in Genesis, there's something beautiful happening. After creating humankind, God says, and God saw all that he made, and it was very, very good. In other words, God told Israelites that they were not a statistical mistake. He told them that he willed them into existence because he loved them and he deliberately made them. Through the story of creation, God reassures these wretched people how important they are, that they are beautifully made, all full of potential. Remember where and when they were reading these words for the first time. They were in the desert, in no man's land, just like today's refugees, wondering about their predicament and the choices they made. They are not sure whether it was better to stay in Egypt as slaves or in this desolate landscape. Only when I read these verses in Genesis 1, within its historical and cultural context, do I realize why and what I wanted to do for that little boy in the marketplace. I realized from God's example in Genesis that I wanted to create a memory for that little boy. A memory for this little boy that would maybe, just maybe, help him to get through when evil thug steps on him in an attempt to destroy his happiness and innocence. I hope that the memory would sustain him through difficult times of his life and help him to understand that there will be always someone who thinks well of him, who will see how precious he is. God also told these battered former slaves that the future before them is not necessarily going to be all roses, but he did tell them that he would be with them. And here's a little digression. It is important to know that God did not promise to remove uncertainty from us, but he did promise that he will be with us as we go through uncertainties of life in this sinful world. We all have these special memories, a lesson, a little talk that your parent gave you or a teacher. And I remember one lecturer at Newbold, and I cannot remember the name, but I remember the words he said. He said, if you got the theology of sin wrong, you are most likely to get all the others' doctrines wrong. We Christians continuously underestimate the power of sin. The most obvious and debilitating characteristic of sin is that it doesn't make sense. And Christians don't get that. They think that if we pray and go to church, somehow we will escape the uncertainty of life. Yet the chances of getting hit by a car as you cross the road are equal to the chances of an atheist crossing the road. You know that to be true. We like to invite the Christ to be the driver of our car. We have to invite him in the car as long as we are in the driving seat, isn't it? Many Christians sing, I surrender all, while at the same time they cling to the daft, often conspiracy theories in hope and for some sense of control. We cannot control things. We may extend our lives by eating a little bit healthy, making good choices, but the bottom line is that sin does not make sense and it never will. So whenever you try to reason, oh, why did he die, or why the child has gone, there is no answer to that. And the sooner you understand, the better you will understand who God is and what he does for you. You see, when we get into these conspiracy theories, we like to this is a desire for control. Because it is much more comforting to believe that behind the craziness of this world, there is a diabolical but intelligent group of people who control the levers of power by proxy, than to believe that the world is guided by sheer stupidity. Einstein was right when he said that the most abundant substance in our corner of the universe is the hydrogen and human stupidity. You know, I have been in a gift shop and I found a key ring, and it said there, please do not lead me into temptation. I will find them myself. And it's so true. You may improve somehow your odds. You may have a healthier lifestyle. You may be more careful taking risks. But the truth is that the life is full of uncertainties. And as the Italian proverb says, at the end of the game, both the pawn and the king go into the same box. And God knows this. God knows this. You need to realize that. God knows that life is so uncertain. So he creates a memory for you. Instead of illusionary and superficial sense of control that you get through conspiracy theories and I don't know what, God says, surrender to me. Trust me. Have faith in me. He says, I have created you, and what I have created is very good. You are not a reject, a runt, a piece of driftwood floating in the storming ocean. I have plans for you. And when the things go really bad, Isaiah 43:1 says, remember that I have created you and that you are mine. He told them the story, not only how he created them, but also that he created them with the joy and passion. God wanted to create a memory for them, a memory which culminated in creation of the Sabbath. And you remember the instruction. God says, remember the Sabbath day. And isn't it so appropriate gift? You know, I saw the gift here. What do you give to a person who knows nothing but the hard work? You give him a rest. What a wonderful God that is. He created them a memory, a day when they will be reminded, no matter how tough life can be, that there is someone who works tirelessly to secure their future. A memory that will help them in the time an oppressor or the burdens of life press them hard. It's almost like a lullaby, you know, when you sing to your child and you worry about the future, but you sing so that he has something when he leaves. I remember when we had to do national service when I was 19. I was still a kid. And I remember the night what my father was telling me, because he knew he won't see me for a year. In those days, there were no chatting, and stuff like that. So he was saying, and every word was deep of meaning, and it sustained me through that year. And I think this is, I asked the question, what I'm doing here. This is the essence of the good news. Genesis tells us something about how the world was created, and this is a silver dish. But Genesis is also a story of compassionate and caring Creator and the loving relationship He wants to have with us, with His creation. And these are the golden apples. Genesis is the story of creation, but even more so, it is the story of Creator. Genesis and little boy remind me that what we are here today, why we are here today. We are here to bring the good news to this little boy and others like him. We are called to create memories for the people around us. Love him or loathe him. But Pope Francis was right when he was saying in the US Congress last year, we see refugees like numbers, he said, but we should see them as the faces, individuals, looking for hope for themselves and those they love. And we all are refugees in a search for a better home. We will all have tough time from time to time. There will be time when we will feel unwanted, smaller than a grain of sand. One day you may find yourself staring through the hospital window, watching the world passing by as you feel stuck and left behind after hearing a bad news from the doctor. You may feel inadequate, humiliated, abandoned. The good news is that God has created, and He still creates memories for the moments like these. He reminds you that He created you, that He willed you into existence, and that you are precious to Him. And when it is difficult for you to see over the horizon, He created memories like Sabbath for you so that you have time to pause and reflect and see how things will be one day. God says, impress these words of mine on your heart and on your soul. In a Greek story of creation of mankind, gods are so unhappy. They are so unhappy with the humankinds. They might want to make their life miserable. And they decide to do something about it. They want to make it even more miserable. So they decide that each god should bring a gift, put it in a box, and give it to the most beautiful woman in the world, and her name, Pandora. And Pandora receives naively that gift from the gods who don't like mankind, and she opens, and all the evils of the world come up. And she struggles to close the box, and she manages to close until only one gift was inside, and that gift was hope. And I always wonder, when Paul was talking about this unknown God, did some of them think maybe this was this unknown God who put that gift of hope inside? Point is that we too are invited to create memories for others. Memories of hope that will sustain and carry people through. To tell them a good news about the one who created them, who sees how precious and holy they are.